Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on building a business case for job evaluation. Those who don't know me, I'm Tim Kellett from Paydata, and thank you very much for joining today's webinar. Hopefully you can see our screen here and the slides today. We'll send out the slides to everyone afterwards, and we'll send out a link to today's recording if you want to catch up later, or your colleagues want to catch up later. Just going to move on a little bit. First of all, say a little bit about Paydata and who we are. So we are a reward management consultancy, and we help lots of different organisations in lots of wide range of sectors to find, attract, motivate, and retain and engage their people, the right sort of people to meet their objectives. And we do this in a number of different ways as well. So we work in a number of different areas of reward. Obviously, clues in the name, benchmarking. So we do a lot of pay and benefits benchmarking, particularly popular between now and the sort of end of the year as well with organisations. We help support developing reward and recognition strategies and conducting reward health checks. I think the key thing which is pertinent to today is job evaluation. And we support organisations in assessing their roles, either through using our own pay grade job evaluation tool or working through and developing career and job family frameworks, frameworks for some organisations, reviewing their own job evaluation methodology and the way that's been applied as well. And that can also get involved in developing and looking at job documentation, which is obviously a key input into evaluating and assessing roles as well. So, and one of the other things that we do, the last one on there, is the research and insight. So we provide lots of regular research and insight into reward and elements of reward, and that includes hosting webinars. We bring in external experts to talk about various activities and topics. And today's topic, because we are experts at job evaluation and over 25 years experience of working with all the different job evaluation systems out there, we thought we'd host one of these webinars ourselves. And that's what we've got today, really. So I'm delighted to include my colleague Joe Price, who's our lead reward consultant. He gets involved in a lot of job evaluation implementation projects, and he's going to talk to you today, as I said, about building a business case for job evaluation and getting that on the senior management's agenda. I would say if you've got any questions, you can put it in the Q&A part of today's chat. We'll hold them until the end, and then we'll ask Joe those questions at the end. And any if we run out of time or any questions we can't actually answer immediately, we'll note those down and we'll send the answers out with the slides as well. So that's enough of me talking, and over to you, Joe. Sorry.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everybody. So yeah, I'm Joe from Paydata, as Tim said. I help our customers with things like job evaluation, grade structures, pay structures, job architecture, reward strategies, anything related to reward, really. And what we're going to discuss today, as Tim mentioned, is building a business case for job evaluation, because we all know within HR and reward that it's a hugely important process and methodology, but sometimes it can be difficult selling the benefits and influencing other stakeholders within the business. So in terms of what we're going to cover, you can see on the screen there, we'll talk a little bit about the context in the moment and why job evaluation at this moment in time is particularly relevant and seems to be back on the agenda for a lot of organizations. We'll then talk about the business case for job evaluation, speaking the language of the business, common barriers and how to overcome them, and then point 5, or part 5, should I say, how to build a compelling business case. We'll talk about the essential core steps, the framework, if you like, to put together a compelling business case within your own organizations, and then, of course, closing and next steps. And as Tim says, if you've got any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A as we go through, and we'll try our best to either answer them today, or, as Tim says, we'll respond when we send out the slides. So I guess, just to start off, let's set the scene and a little bit of context and understand, why at this moment in time, particular job evaluation, is back on the agenda for a lot of organisations, and also what goes wrong without a structured approach in place. So job evaluation has been around for a long time, been around for decades, so it's nothing new. You'll all be familiar with it, but it's back on the agenda because the environment around organisations is changing. So employees increasingly expect pay decisions to be transparent and evidence-based. The EU Pay Transparency Directive has helped drive that conversation and is influencing expectations beyond the EU. So actually, we're not directly covered by that legislation, but it is driving conversations within the UK nonetheless. And also some organisations who have European operations particularly relevant as well. So that's something, pay transparency, both expectations and also legislation. At the same time, boards and regulators are asking harder questions about fairness, consistency and governance, while ongoing cost pressures mean organisations need confidence that workforce spend is controlled, justified and optimised. Workforce spend is quite often the biggest spend an employer has, and therefore making sure that it's optimised and pay is justified and controlled is hugely important to organisations. And now together, these pressures are driving renewed interest in job evaluation as a more objective and consistent basis for structuring roles, grading jobs and making pay decisions. But what happens when organisations don't have that objective foundation in place? Which brings us onto this slide, the cost of doing nothing. Now, job evaluation isn't an end in itself. Its purpose is to provide an objective foundation for grading roles and making pay decisions. In many organisations, grades and pay structures are closely linked. Quite often you'll grade a job and then attached to that grade will be some sort of pay structure. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to refer to both grading and pay together throughout this session. Now, without that foundation, grades and pay can gradually drift over time, becoming influenced by negotiation, precedent, individual judgment, rather than the requirements of the role or objective criteria. As consistency reduces, organisations can face greater equal pay and discrimination risk, and employees may question the fairness of decisions. And then, of course, things like retention can suffer. It also becomes harder to compare roles and make organisational design decisions because there is no common framework to assess the size of jobs. And ultimately, managers are left making more ad hoc decisions, which can compound cost and risk over time. Grading decisions, pay decisions, hugely important decisions for organisations, hugely costly decisions. If you're asking people to operate in an environment with no framework when they're making ad hoc and inconsistent decisions, it presents a lot of risk. So ultimately, that's probably the biggest takeaway here. It's about having that framework and structure to be able to do all of those things there and avoid those risks and mitigate those risks. So that brings us on to the next section, the business case for job evaluation. Now, it's not just a HR process, we all know that, but I think internally within businesses, it can sometimes just be seen as just another HR process. And the key really is to reframe it in the terms that the business understands and wants to hear. And you can see there that actually we're phrasing it as a business control and decision-making framework. So not just a HR process, but a business control and decision-making framework. So the core message from this slide really is that job evaluation is not just a HR technical process. It acts as a business control framework, which I just mentioned. Businesses rely on control frameworks whenever decisions need to be made consistently, transparently and at scale. And job evaluation plays that role for grading, pay and workforce decisions. It provides a robust foundation for consistent grading and pay structures. It supports better control of workforce spend and helps reduce pay inefficiency. It also builds confidence in grading and pay decisions, which can support things like engagement and retention. And it also gives leaders clearer role boundaries and hierarchy for organisational design decisions. Finally, because the process is structured and auditable, it supports governance, compliance, and risk management. So you can see already there, we're talking beyond sort of the HR environment of it, we've gone beyond talking about it being a process, talking about grades, talking about levels, talking about the things that we typically and rightly would talk about with an HR award and job evaluation. We're talking about cost control, we're talking about organisational clarity, we're talking about governance, we're talking about retention, and we're talking about robust foundation. And ultimately, we're framing that as a business control framework. And as I mentioned, business control framework, that's what the CFO wants to hear. That's what the CEO wants to hear. They want to know that decisions are controlled with an auditable, objective framework ultimately. And it's about having defensibility of those decisions that it enables. So this slide translates job evaluation benefits into business outcomes. So on the left-hand side, you've got what job evaluation delivers, and then on the right-hand side, you've got what the business gets, and each benefit connects directly to a clear outcome. So a robust foundation for grading and pay leads to more consistent and defensible decisions across the organisation. Better cost control helps reduce pay drift, salary compression, and unbudgeted spend. Greater confidence in grading and pay decisions can support engagement and retention. Common framework for comparing roles supports better organisational design and reporting structured decisions. And because the process is structured and auditable, it strengthens governance by reducing risk and providing a clear audit trail. And the key point is that every job evaluation benefit should be linked to a clear business outcome that matters to the organisation. You need to put things, you need to talk about the outcomes and the benefits in a way that people resonate with, and, your other stakeholders ultimately. And all of these things matter to the organisation. So now which leads us on to sort of the next section, which is speaking the language of the business. And the core message really remains the same. Job evaluation provides an objective and consistent basis for grading pay and workforce decisions. That's ultimately what it's there to do. But the key is to tailor that and tailor the benefits to each stakeholder that you might need to, you might be talking to at any given time, or who the business case might be going to, for example. So finance senior leaders, other HR colleagues will each be listening for different benefits. So the key is to emphasize the parts of the business case that matter most to each audience. So we'll start off with finance. Clearly a really important stakeholder in all of this. They need to know that it's not just going to be another cost. They need to know that this is an investment. It's an investment in a framework that helps protect risk, provides governance, helps control costs. That's what they want to hear and understand. So for finance, the strongest message, as I mentioned, is cost control. Workforce spend is one of the largest costs in most organisations. So job evaluation needs to be positioned as a way to support better control of that spend. Without a consistent framework, pay decisions become reactive because there's no objective basis for comparing roles. And over time, grade creep and pay drift can increase workforce costs, while organisations lose visibility of whether workforce spend remains aligned to role value. With a grade structure anchored to objective role value, pay decisions become more evidence-based and consistent. Pay drift and compression can be identified and managed more effectively, while budget decisions become easier to justify because they are based on evidence rather than negotiation or precedent. So hopefully this slide should provide some useful information and tips and pointers that you need to speak to finance about job evaluation. But there are, of course, other stakeholders, which brings us on to the next slide. Excuse me. So next slide, we have some other of the main stakeholders, which is senior leaders and then other HR colleagues. So job evaluation provides a consistent understanding of relative role size and accountability, giving leaders a more objective basis for organizational and workforce decisions. It provides an objective basis for organization design, growth and restructuring decisions, giving leaders a more robust way to compare roles and make decisions about future structures. Ultimately, that creates greater confidence in grading and pay and wider workforce decisions because they are supported by a clear and consistent framework. So those are the benefits. That's kind of what senior leaders would typically be looking for. For HR, and I'm talking about, maybe your other HR colleagues, the business case is about fairness, trust, and governance. So job evaluation, as you know, supports fair and equitable grading and pay decisions by assessing roles against objective criteria. And it gives HR greater confidence in market benchmarking too, by helping ensuring roles are compared on a like-for-like basis. And the reason I pulled that out is because job evaluation enables you to do market benchmarking with roles of a similar size. So rather than relying on job titles, which can vary and generally are pretty meaningless, as hopefully you'll appreciate, we don't do benchmarking with job titles. We tend to do it on role size and role type. And job evaluation gives you that role size, and therefore, gives HR greater confidence in those benchmarking decisions, but also when they get queries from employees and managers, they can confidently say, no, we've gone through a robust process, we've evaluated the role, this is the benchmark, this is how it's come out, and we can feel confident in that decision. So just want to highlight that particular point as well. And of course, it provides a documented framework to support governance, pay transparency, and risk management. So I guess the important thing to note is that there's different stakeholders, they're listening for different benefits. You will have to tailor your message differently depending on who you're speaking to and so on. But you don't need a different business case for each audience. So we're not advocating that you would have a different business case for each, but it's about understanding who the business case might be going to, which stakeholder or stakeholders, and then tailoring it accordingly and tailoring the message accordingly. Because ultimately you're wanting to appeal to their priorities, to influence them and gain their buy-in. Now, common barriers and how to overcome them. I'm sure that most of you will have heard most of these that we're about to cover, but hopefully we can give some helpful tips in how to overcome them. I guess the key when you have people question things or put barriers in place is to respond calmly and practically. And you just use the same evidence-based arguments we've already covered: cost, risk, consistency, better decision making. So let's have a look at some. So a few objections down the left, and then how to respond on the right. So the first objection is usually we don't need it, or it's too complex. And the response here is to show the cost of not having a framework, so the cost of doing nothing. We touched on that before, but pay drift, for example, is costly because small inconsistent decisions accumulate over time. For example, roles being overgraded, higher salaries being agreed to solve short-term issues, or similar roles being paid differently without a clear rationale. Equal pay risk can also become a significant cost if decisions cannot be justified, because the organisation may face claims, back pay, legal costs, and reputational damage. So that's just some of the things that you say, well, actually the cost of doing nothing could be this, it could be these risks, it could be poor pay decisions over time, poor grading decisions over time that accumulate over time and actually add up to a much bigger cost down the road. So it's just about helping people understand the cost of doing nothing. The second objection, it will cost too much. I guess it kind of links to the first one, really. Here, the important point is to frame job evaluation as an investment. I mentioned this before. It's not, particularly from finance's perspective, it's not a cost, it is an investment. It's an investment in control. The investment is in creating a framework that helps prevent unmanaged grade and pay drift, supports better workforce spend decisions, and reduces the risk of expensive issues emerging later. The third objection is too slow and bureaucratic, really common. I think that perception often comes from older approaches. Modern job evaluation is much leaner and faster, and it therefore takes up less time than many organisations expect. So in this instance, it's about explaining to them job evaluation's moved on. Modern systems recognise that systems of the past probably did take too long. And it might be about getting them involved in the process, demoing the system to them so they can see how quick and intuitive and fast it really is in reality. Getting them on board right at the beginning when you're thinking about it, thinking about different providers, get them to have a look and be involved in the demo so they can see it in action. Of course, there's also the consideration of implementation, so not just like the time it takes to do an evaluation or evaluate a job, but there's also concerns around implementation. But a well-managed implementation can also minimize disruption and focus effort where it adds the most value. And many organizations start with the roles or areas most closely linked to the problem, risk, or opportunity they're trying to address. So you can also prioritize which areas come first. You don't always have to do it in one go. And as I say, a well-managed implementation, you kind of can manage around that. The fourth objection is it will cause disruption. Now, that there can be disruption if implementation is poorly managed, but a structured approach helps reduce uncertainty. In many cases, inaction creates more disruption because inconsistent decisions continue to build up. So we're kind of arguing the other way, really, aren't we? We're arguing inaction actually causes more disruption. And then the final objection is we don't have quality job data such as job descriptions. Again, something else that's really, really common. And the response to this is that, if you don't have job descriptions ready to go, and some organizations don't, there is sometimes a process of getting all of that job data into a good place. I kind of mentioned already that you can do things in phases, and you can also run job description work and job evaluations in parallel. You could start with the area that might be, a particular area that has the need for it the most, make sure those job descriptions and job data are in a good state, evaluate those, and while you're evaluating those, you can work on the job data for other areas. So you can, again, this goes back to the implementation and how well it's managed and what type of implementation you choose. You can run that in parallel. You don't have to wait until all of the job descriptions are in good order to actually start. So the overall message is that these objections are valid concerns. You will hear them, absolutely. We're not dismissing them. Totally reasonable concerns, but they are not reasons to avoid job evaluation. They're issues to plan for and manage as part of the business case ultimately. So, which brings us on to how to build a compelling business case. So far we've looked at why job evaluation matters, how to position it for different stakeholders, and how to respond to common objections. But now we're looking at how to put that into a clear, structured business case, from defining the problem through to defining success. And we're going to talk about the steps and the framework and how you should structure it. So a strong business case should start with the problem, risk, or opportunity you're looking to address, not with job evaluation as the solution. You don't present the solution first. You need to present the opportunity, the risk, or the problem. Job evaluation is the solution, but that comes later in the business case. But you have to start with defining the problem. So that might be unmanaged grading pay drift, inconsistent grading and pay decisions, equal pay exposure, lack of confidence in current structures, or an opportunity. We're talking about problems there, but don't forget opportunity as well. Support growth. You might be, the organization of the business might be growing at a great speed, and you want to put the structure in place now for future growth so that you don't arrive at a destination without that structure in place. You could be doing some mergers and acquisition work, and it's really helpful for that because you can take an acquired business, you can evaluate jobs and put them into the framework. So there's opportunity as well. So it's not just about problems and risks, there's opportunities too, and that's really important. Second, and again, this is another really important point, quantify the impact where possible. It will, if you are able to, will add weight to the business case. For example, if the issue is grade and pay drift, you might look at pay differences between similar roles, inconsistencies in how comparable roles have been graded, or cases where pay has moved away from intended ranges over time. If the issue is equal pay exposure, you might look for areas where similar roles are paid differently without a clear documented rationale. But where you don't have data, or the data is incomplete or not available, describe the impact clearly and qualitatively. So ideally, you want the impact to be quantifiable, but if not, describe it qualitatively. But it's really important that you describe the impact. Third, linked organizational priorities. So this is now where we're sort of, people are reading the business case and they go, okay, I can see the problem. I can understand the impact, but they still might be thinking, so what? Why do I care about that? And this is where you link it into the organizational priorities. And this is what makes the business case land ultimately. You are showing why the problem, the risk, or the opportunity matters to the organization now. And it may connect to things like cost control, to governance, pay transparency, growth, organizational design, employee confidence, mergers and acquisitions, all of the things that we've discussed. But it's about linking it to organizational priorities, particularly with the senior team, the executives, what is a priority to them, and it's about linking it into that. It will resonate with them ultimately if it does that. Fourth, present job evaluation as the solution. So you notice that we didn't get to the solution until much later in the business case. So we looked at the problem, the opportunity, the risk, quantified the impact, linked priorities, and now this is where we're setting up for the solution. So we present job evaluation as a solution by showing how it directly addresses the issues you've already identified. Now, these two bits are really important, quite often forgotten about. You want to set out the outcomes, be specific about what will be different as a result, describe the future, whether that is addressing a problem, reducing a risk, or realizing an opportunity. Help people envisage what will be different, what it will be like in the future. So, for example, more consistent grading decisions, clearer pay ranges, stronger governance, better evidence for managers and HR, improved employee confidence, smoother acquisitions, smoother mergers, whatever it might be. And then finally, define success metrics upfront. So this is really important because you want to know, whether whether it has achieved, I guess, the intended outcomes and desired effect and desired impact. So, this might be fewer grading challenges, for example, improved confidence in pay decisions that might be measured through employee surveys, a consistent grade structure, strong governance evidenced through clear audit trail, but define success metrics up front. And as I say, 0.5 and 0.6 quite often are forgotten about, but they're what make the business case really credible. Because if you've got business cases going in from other parts of the organization, you can bet that they're setting out outcomes, should I say, defining success metrics, describing what will be different in the future. So, job evaluation and as a business case should be no different. And those are the six steps, really, the framework, the template for building a strong and compelling business case. And I guess just before we move on, you'll notice that we didn't present the solution until after we defined the problem, quantified the impact, into the priorities. So the next slide, I guess it's just going back a little bit to what we touched on before. So on the previous slide, we looked at the ingredients. But before you start writing the business case, we've talked about talking the language of the different stakeholders. Before you start writing the business case, it's important to think about who it needs to influence. Who is the business case going to? Who will ultimately sign it off? That will help shape the evidence, outcomes, and messages you choose to emphasize within that business case. Now, I mentioned before, in most cases, you don't need a separate business case for each audience. You build one core business case, but you may need to adapt or emphasize different elements as it moves through different stakeholders and different approval stages. So, there might be different gates that it needs to go through. First of all, it might need to go through HR and then maybe the CFO. In some instances, it may or may not need to go to the CEO. Each organization is slightly different in terms of the sign-off process, but there might be different gates. And you might need to tailor and tweak it depending on which stage you're at, but I think you can still have one core business case nonetheless. Now you can see on there, this is just sort of like summarizing a little bit what we talked about before. But for finance, you want to lead with workforce spend, cost control, pay alignment. Those are the things that matter to them. For senior leaders, lead with organizational effectiveness and decision-making framework for them. It helps with organizational effectiveness. For the board, lead with governance, assurance, and risk. Again, it may or may not need to go to the board, but if it does, lead with the governance, assurance, and risk. That's what they care about. And then for HR, we've discussed fairness, credibility, consistency, and confidence. The key, as I mentioned, is to build a strong business case and then present it in a way that resonates with the audience you're trying to influence at any given time. So we're coming towards the end now. Just before we do, just look at some. I picked these out in particular because I think that when building a business case, one of the steps we mentioned was setting out the outcomes. And in practice, this is often where people need the most help. It can be one of the trickier aspects of the business case to put together. Because it's relatively easy to describe the problem and propose job evaluation as the solution, but it's often harder to clearly articulate what success will look like afterwards. So these are just examples of the types of outcomes you might include in your business case, depending on the problem, risk, or opportunity you're trying to address. So it's not a definitive or an exhaustive list, they're just some examples. Now, earlier I mentioned that grades and pay structures are often closely linked. That's why many of these outcomes relate not just to grading decisions, but also to pay decisions and wider workforce decisions. Now, success might mean a grade and pay structure that is more consistent, transparent, and defensible. It might mean pay decisions are made against defined ranges. That doesn't remove flexibility or discussion, but it means decisions take place within a clearer framework rather than relying primarily on negotiation or precedent. It might mean managers have a clearer framework for pay and progression conversations, helping them make and explain decisions more consistently. I think that's a really good one to highlight, actually, and a really important one, because managers are such a key component in helping you communicate pay and award and grading decisions confidently. If they understand it, if they get it, if they believe in the framework and systems that underpin it, they will communicate and answer confidently and clearly with their employees or the members in their team. If they don't, and they just say, I don't know how it works, or go and ask HR, you undermine pay and reward decisions. So I think that's a really important one to pull out. What does the future look like? It might mean managers have a clearer framework for pay and progressing conversations. I think that's hugely important. For some organisations, success will be fewer pay disputes, grievances, and equal pay concerns because decisions are better evidenced and applied more consistently. And another common outcome, should I say, we touched on this before, is more accurate benchmarking. Again, I think this is a really important one. By providing a consistent way to assess and compare roles, job evaluation helps ensure market comparison with based on like-for-like roles, giving greater confidence in benchmarking decisions. For many organisations, job evaluation can also provide a platform for future reward strategy, pay transparency, and organisational design. So on top of your grading structure and your pay structure, you can then put a career framework in place. You can have job families, you can have competencies. It really does provide a platform for future growth in other areas of HR as well. So those are just some examples of successful outcomes. As I say, it's not an exhaustive list, and you won't need to use all of them. It's ultimately selecting the outcomes that best demonstrate how job evaluation will address the original problem, risk, or opportunity you've identified in your business case. So just to close then, I guess that we've covered why job evaluation is back on the agenda, what can happen without a structured approach, how to build a compelling business case for job evaluation. And the key message throughout has been that job evaluation is not just the HR process. I mentioned that a few times. It's a business control and decision-making framework that supports better grading, pay, and workforce decisions. And ultimately, this is really important, it's an investment in control, clarity, and confidence across the organisation. It's not a cost, it is an investment. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the key takeaways from today and then the next steps. So key takeaways on the left. So as we mentioned, job evaluation, business control and decision-making framework, not just the HR process. A strong business case focuses on the priorities of the stakeholders it needs to influence. Common objections can be addressed with clear evidence-based responses. A compelling business case follows a structured approach from defining the problem, risk, or opportunity through to defining success. Job evaluation has organizational organization-wide impact. It provides a common framework for decisions across all roles. And then in terms of the next steps, as Tim mentioned at the beginning, you'll get a copy of these slides. So use the framework we've discussed today. 6-step structure provides a practical starting point for building your own business case. Use today's messaging by framing the business case around the priorities of the stakeholders you need to influence. And then just finally, if you'd like to see how a modern job evaluation system can support the process, we're always happy to arrange a follow-up call. We have a system called Paygrade. It only has 5 factors, so it's robust, but also very lean and fast. And we'd be more than happy to show you that, to give you a demonstration, talk about how it potentially could be implemented in your own organisation. So we're going to have some questions, I think, in a second, but just before we do, thanks for joining. Hope this has been helpful, and that you can apply some of this in your own organisation. I think that brings us on to questions.
Thank you so much, Joe, for taking us through that, and that was really interesting. I remember looking at the draft slides last week and thinking there's some really good points here, because I think this is sort of really key for people. It's obviously, a significant project for HR, and making sure that you've got the sort of buy-in of the business is sort of key to try and get the budget, obviously, but also the sort of buy-in to actually get this work done. So that's some really good points there. So if anyone has any questions, if you want to put that in the Q&A chat, we'll be pleased to. Joe will be pleased to answer them. I did have one or two myself as well, Joe, as we were going through actually. And the first one was about, you mentioned about some of the sort of, pressures why people want to look at it now more than perhaps before. And would you say there's a particular driver which is leading it? So are things like, say, cost pressures? Is that perhaps more of a driver than pay transparency at the moment, or anything? Is there a particular thing which you're finding?
Well, I think that there was 3 things on that slide around sort of like transparency legislation, like the governance and the risk and the cost. I think it's the first and the third. So cost pressures. I think every organisation is feeling that now. I think that the key is you want to make sure you're paying the right amount for the role. Not too, you don't want to pay more than you need to, or less than, or less. It's about getting pay right. And that, obviously, we've discussed how job evaluation can help with that, both in terms of pay structures and benchmarking, and making sure that you're paying the right amount, and you're not paying these roles too much at the expense of these roles over here, which might need to be paid more. You can't recruit and retain into those. So that's one element, I think, Tim. And then the other element is, pay transparency, both from rising employee expectations, also because of the EU legislation as well. And although we're not directly involved, it is impacting us, because it's forcing a conversation amongst employers and organisations, and obviously increased focus on pay transparency as a whole. So probably those two. It's not to say that risk and governance is important, but I think those are the drivers.
I think also, I mean, detected in our sort of industry HR workshops that a lot of people are looking at, process efficiencies, combining it with sort of digitization, use of AI, and they're perhaps doing more sort of organization restructures. And I suppose, job evaluation can be a bit of the underpin for that, can't it? Because
absolutely,
yeah,
it helps. I mean, if organizations are restructuring, because of cost savings, for example, it can help with that. Or if organizations are restructuring because they need to put more resource in a certain area that's aligned to growth, that, we talked about it being helping opportunity as well. Organizations do that all the time. They identify areas of growth. They might need to put a new team or structure in place. Job evaluation can help with that organizational design piece. It can also help you benchmark those roles, make sure that you're, paying competitively and getting the people. So it helps with those sorts of things. So we're seeing that too.
And you also mentioned actually about, I think you mentioned about sort of one of the barriers is the sort of disruption to the organization. And talking to lots of organizations at the moment, it seems like people in HR so overrun with the sort of overwhelmed by the day job and things. It's difficult to get some of these projects in, and that's why I appreciate everyone who's joined today. I guess have you detected a bit more when you've implemented job evaluation? Have you been asked to perhaps undertake more, take more of the workload of that than perhaps 5 years ago?
Definitely. So I think, like, over the last couple of years, so like whenever we do an job evaluation implementation, obviously we come up with an implementation plan, and that will look different for each customer, depending on what they how much resource they have available to do it, and so on and so on. Lots of different factors go into that. But we have noticed, as part of the implementation, us as in Paydata doing more of the initial evaluations, so that the customer is still involved. We still do the training, and they still sign things off and so on and so on. But we're doing probably more of the implementation, so that when we come to hand it over, and it's BAU, they just do the maintenance and new roles and stuff like that. Because the thing is, with any implementation, there generally is a fair amount of roles to be evaluated. Traditionally, we would always do some, and the customer would do the rest. But we've found we're doing more and more because of that. And I suppose it's a long-winded way of saying is that implementation can be flexible to suit the needs and the resources and the context of each customer.
Yeah, it's different, isn't it, for each customer and what they've got on at the moment. So we've got a question from Amy, actually. What do you think about AI's place in job evaluations? Very, very, very well done, Amy. That's very, isn't it, current?
So I think that AI lends itself really well to something like job evaluation, because AI is great at looking at taking information like a job description, looking at it, understanding it, and then applying that either to like methodology or profiles. So I think it does lend itself really well. So our methodology at the moment is still human led. It's not AI led at this moment in time. But I have seen some AI job evaluation methodologies on the market. But I think that the same, whether it's human led or AI led, I think there's a couple of principles that remain the same. The quality of the job information, such as job descriptions, needs to be accurate and robust either way. Because if you're feeding something to AI and it's not accurate, it's going to be making decisions on inaccurate data. So that applies either way to AI, human led. And if if it is AI doing the initial job evaluation, of course, it still needs to be checked by a human, in terms of the output and stuff. So I think that it's not far off before you see more AI-led job evaluation tools with humans checking them, as opposed to what has traditionally been the case where it's just been human-led, i.e. people doing the evaluations. But yeah, I think it does lend itself well to it.
I think it's probably like a lot of HR activities or any activities, at the moment where it's very much dependent on the input, the data. It's very much, but it's also dependent on a human checking that, so it can't be completely AI generated. I also think because if you think about the outcomes of this, particularly if they're linked to pay and things, would humans be completely, would your employees be completely satisfied if their job had been evaluated purely using AI? They'd want some sort of checking, perhaps process going through that. So, okay, no, I hope that's helped with that question, Amy. Anyone else who can ask any questions, then please do. I did have one more. I'm sorry, Joe. Just to sort of, it was, I guess it was really about, you mentioned about the sort of interlinking, how job evaluation, it can sort of link in with other aspects. And I think that might be a key way of obtaining that business case. So I know that when we work with organizations to develop their reward strategies, that job hierarchy, job evaluation is part of that. Is, I suppose, if you get it right, it can link so well with performance, with staff retention, with pay, and how you link it with reward. Would you sort of, I guess the question is, have you seen that work in practice? Where someone sort of, it's part of a link of that whole reward piece and recognition piece and performance
Yeah.
piece.
Absolutely. Like, I think the best way to describe it, job evaluation is the foundation for all of that. So the immediate thing people think of is so you've got your job evaluation, and then, that gives you your evaluated levels. And then on top of that sits your grade and pay structure. Typically, we discussed how it links into market benchmarking. And of course, then, it also links into things like recruitment and stuff, because, you're either going to market with a pay range that's been determined by job evaluation, or a market benchmark that's been determined by job evaluation. So I think those are the things that people think of with job evaluation, but job evaluation is the foundation. Those other things sit on top of it. It comes from the job evaluation, that's the starting point. But then on top of all of that as well, you can have your career frameworks, you can have, it's sports organizational design, as we've discussed, it can feed into performance management, you can have competency frameworks. There's a lot of different uses for it, but it all starts with job evaluation as being the foundation. But if the foundation is shaky or wobbly, or sorry, I think of a better word, but if either that could be not a very good or robust methodology, or poor quality data going into the methodology, and all of those other things that sit on top, that carries a risk. You could get the wrong grade, you could get the wrong person, you could get the wrong benchmark. So we view it very much as the foundation. And we often see people do that, do the grade and pay structure, then they'll do the competency framework, then they'll do the career paths. They won't try and do all of that in one, because you can imagine those are big projects in their own right. They might do job evaluation 1 year, and next year they'll do career framework, so they build on it and sort of and put it into their HR strategy or HR roadmap.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Joe. And actually, one thing, would you say that with the sort of more modern approach, I'm sort of leading question this, apologies, but with sort of more modern job evaluation methodologies and techniques, that can overcome that sort of, I guess one of the classic things people say about it is, oh, we don't want to go for job evaluation because you can create a cottage industry, where you've got like a full-time job of evaluating jobs. How is that a common misconception or a common rebuttal?
Yeah,
and would you rebut it by saying actually you've actually, the methodologies now are a lot more simpler or more easier to implement now?
Yeah, I think it's it's much quicker. I think we touched on it in the session, but the modern job evaluation is much quicker than older versions. I think to evaluate a job in our own pay grade system might take about 10 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes. So it's pretty quick, or up to, I should say. Sometimes it'll be quicker than that. So yeah, I think that's I think it's a lot quicker these days than people probably appreciate, which is why I think it's important to, if you've got any of those concerns in the business, get them involved if you're looking at vendors so that they can see a job being evaluated and they can see how quick it is in reality, and hopefully they can, understand that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it's key's communication, isn't it? So, well, look, that was all my questions. I had a load of questions. Sorry about that, Joe. Hopefully, other people have found that useful. Don't think we've got any more questions. If you do have any questions after post this, you can always email myself or Joe if you'd like, and happy to answer those questions afterwards. Likewise, if you want to have a chat anyway. So there's our details and as well. So as I sort of said, we'll send out a link to today's webinar, and so you've got the recording. We'll send out the slides as well for people. As I said, it's this as a topic is a sort of key thing at the moment. So if you do want to discuss it and need any help with developing a business case, please do get in touch with us. We've had to do that for over many years, haven't we, Joe? Overcome this, and we sometimes start having conversations with people, and it takes them months or years to get to the point where they can implement it and the planets align. So yeah, I hope you found today useful. Do get in touch if you've got any more questions for us. Just one quick advert. We've got another webinar coming up next week, and that's I'll be doing that, and it's a roundtable discussion. If you can believe it, actually beginning of June we started getting people asking us about next year's pay awards and what they'd look like, and so we've been doing collecting data on this already. So we have some really good analysis which I'll present next week about pay awards for next year. And this is a roundtable discussion, so it actually involves people can ask questions and say, this is what we're doing, and these are the challenges we're facing, and this is how we're going to justify this. So we'll send out a link to that. If you want to join that discussion before the summer holidays, then please do. I'm sure you'll find that useful as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Joe. Thank you so much for your time today and your knowledge and expertise. Thank you all for joining today and for staying with us this long, and I hope you found this useful. We will see you again soon, and if I don't speak to you beforehand, have a great summer. Stay cool in the hot weather. Bye bye now then, everyone. Take care.
Bye.